Over 400 million tons of plastic are produced worldwide every year. And plastic pollution is a complex issue, of course, and it affects all land, freshwater, and also marine ecosystems.
It threatens human and ecosystems' health, negatively impacting economic activities and contributes to climate change.
And by 2015 alone, 60% of all plastic ever produced had turned into waste.
And yearly up to 14 billion tons of plastic debris goes into global ocean.
Yeah. And of course, this is a worldwide problem spreading far beyond the national boundaries and also affecting all ecosystems.
And this is just one of the many issues surrounding World Environment Day. So we have us joining today is Ambassador Brian D. McFeeters, the US Ambassador to Malaysia. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
All right, so firstly, Brian, maybe you can share how can you leverage your position to effectively address global climate change and as well at the same time promote sustainability, especially today during the World Environment Day?
It's a central issue. I think I'm probably like any U.S. ambassador abroad. We have climate change, the climate crisis, as something that we see as central to national security. It's a global issue. I think in a way it's like the challenge of COVID. COVID was a global issue that nobody wanted to face, and yet the world had to face it. And COVID is not gone, but COVID largely was managed, right? So you can't create a vaccine against climate change, but you can leverage technology, government policy, international cooperation. I guess my main message when I talk about the issue of climate change is or climate crisis. It's such a daunting and serious issue that you could maybe just get really depressed and say, throw up your hands and say there's nothing we can do. But the more I read, the positive side really comes out. I can talk about what's going on in the United States, but it's not just the United States. Around the world, there's this tremendous progress on addressing climate change, which is putting in more renewable energy, developing all of the things that you can't just have renewable energy by itself. You have to have a grid that works with renewable energy, and you have to have battery storage because the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. All of these things need to be put together. But in the United States, there's tremendous progress happening, and the numbers are really showing it. The numbers of investments and the numbers of the numbers on emissions are actually, turning around. So ultimately, I think it's a huge global challenge, but a positive opportunity, including for Malaysia. I think Malaysia can be a real leader, not only for Malaysia itself, but for the region.
But talking about the international collaboration, because most of the countries, they have different in terms of policies, in terms of their industrialization and all that. But how do we enhance in terms of enhance in terms of the climate change monitoring, reporting, and also assessing the whole situation and also the implementation plan in place, for instance? How do we enhance and ensuring transparency and also accountability in this area?
I think it's a very important area, but it's actually, I would say, in my opinion, it's an area of strength, right? So we have, you have an international system. Probably the center of it is the UNFCCC, right? The UN, Forum on Climate Change, I think is what it's called. But that's the UN body that actually runs the COP27, COP28, Council of the Conference of the Parties, where the world gets together and says, how are we doing? And this year, COP28 will be the first, what they call stock taking, which is really officially how are we doing, all the nations in the world in terms of addressing climate change. It'll be done very scientifically. There's a lot of bodies that support UNFCCC. One of them is IPCC, International Party on Conference Change. Sorry, I don't know the names of the acronyms, but that's a group of scientists that's eminent scientists from around the world, including scientists from Malaysia. So Malaysia plays a part in that. So we have, I guess the point I'm trying to make is in terms of like the scientific knowledge about what is the situation in terms of emissions going up and down, that's well known, right? The science is quite good. The harder part is what do you do about it? And that's, I'd be glad to talk about that more, but I think that comes down to government policy, business, and individuals. All three need to be, tremendously active and engaged.
And the the trajectory towards a greener world. And considering the complexities of global climate change, probably can you share the strategies or perhaps the policies to advocate towards greenhouse gas emission in these local communities itself, especially in Malaysia? What do you think about that, Ryan?
I mean, I think the thing that I'm most qualified to talk about is what's going on in the United States and then how the United States wants to and is cooperating with Malaysia. So in the United States, we have a much better story to tell than we did even 2 years ago, because the political parties, politics is difficult in the United States as it is in many countries, but the political parties came together in the United States about a year ago, last August, and they passed something called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a strange name, but it's basically a climate change-focused law. And it creates a tremendous amount of incentives for businesses. So you have the government policy, and then you have the businesses being motivated to go out. And it basically says, if you are a business that's creating anything related to climate change technology, that can be solar, wind, battery storage, improvements to the grid, it can be carbon capture, it can be nuclear, anything that qualifies as contributing to climate change, you get a huge tax break. Businesses love tax breaks, right? It's like, it's just, individuals do too, right? So it really gets people's attention. And it's only been a year, but we're already seeing huge effects. So one of them is the U.S. Information Agency that tracks energy investment estimates that 84% of the investment in energy in the United States this year, 2023, will be in renewable energy. That's a huge change, right? So like another example is the use of coal in the United States. As of 2005, 50% of our electricity still depended on coal. As of 2019, that had already dropped to 23%, and that's even before all these new incentives, right? So the point I'm making is the United States is one of the countries that's really making a transition to renewable energy. Now, in Malaysia's case, Malaysia has its own situation. The Malaysian government needs to make its own decisions, and that's not up to the United States. But what is up to us is to increase the cooperation with Malaysia. So I'm very happy that I think about 2 weeks ago, our special presidential envoy for climate change, former Secretary of State John Kerry, had a phone conversation with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. They talked, about all of the aspects of how the U.S. can cooperate with Malaysia, how Malaysia can be a leader in the region, how Malaysia can be a leader in the upcoming COP28. And so there's going to be follow-up, right? Once you have very senior people like that talk, then people like me follow up on it. We get our teams involved. One of the things we're doing is we're trying to increase, technical and policy cooperation between United States and Malaysia. So just last week, we sent a group of 12 high-level Malaysian officials from the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, from TNB, from SEDA, the Sustainable Energy Development Agency. We sent them back to Arizona and California, and they basically went to see, let's see some solar farms, let's see some solar panel manufacturing plants, let's see what the United States is doing in the grid. To me, that's very powerful, right? Because you can have these abstract, we need to do this and that in terms of improving the grid. If you go and see how somebody did it, it becomes very powerful. Maybe that's not the way you're going to do it, but you say, okay, this is an example, right? So we're trying to do more of that. We're also, here at the embassy, we have a lot of programs centered on cooperation with youth. We have something called Young Southeast Asian Leadership Initiative, where we do a lot of programs, not only on climate. It's not just climate-based, but climate is one of the areas. And through that program, we recently participated in a youth sustainability summit organized by one of the Waisili graduates, or alumni.
Interesting.
Basically just set it up on his own. So we're basically trying to start a conversation between Malaysia and the United States on all levels about renewable energy. And I think Malaysia can go down the same path that the United States does, probably with different elements, because Malaysia has different challenges, but there could be a renewable energy transformation here as well. And I think that's something that hopefully every Malaysian is pushing on that. It has to be something that every Malaysian is engaged in.
Talking about the best practices, because it's very important when adopting something, right? The US as the role model in terms of renewable energy, and Malaysia recently we talk about exporting our renewable energy in the future. This is something that we are targeting, right? So, but how do you see in terms of regional cooperation and collaboration in that sense, in renewable energy adoption, for instance, innovation, also the innovative approaches towards this context. But how do you foresee and how do you see the regional collaboration, especially in ASEAN, for instance?
Right. I think it's crucial. So I'm not going to try to portray myself as an expert in this. I'm a student, right? So you all the three of us can do a lot of reading on this. What my reading has told me is if you're going to put in a renewable energy solution for a country, you have to deal with the problem of intermittency, right? The sun doesn't always shine. Even in Malaysia, the sun doesn't always shine, right? Because you have a lot of rainstorms. So the more you can interconnect the grid, and the Malaysian government is talking about doing more of that with Thailand, for example, and I think also with Singapore. So the more you do that, the more you have this option of like, oh, the sun's not shining in Malaysia right now, but it's shining in Thailand. So you can transfer the energy back and forth. This is a huge emphasis in the United States. They're trying to build many more connections between the grids so that ideally you have, from Maine to New Mexico or, Maine to California, you have the ability to shift power back and forth. And that's something that ASEAN could do with the ASEAN grid. And then you mentioned the idea of exporting renewable energy. I think the government of Malaysia's announcement about that is very important. I didn't understand it first, so I talked to some people, and they tell me that the fact that Malaysia is incentivizing exports of renewable energy is like a good first step because you have this ability for Malaysian companies to develop solar farms. They supply the energy probably to Singapore, right? Singapore is a big market. But then you develop that capacity, and you also develop more renewable energy that can be used in Malaysia. So all of these things can work together to really create, a renewable energy transformation that covers all of ASEAN. I think there's already power from Laos. Laos has a lot of hydropower. I think there's already agreement that brings that power all the way down to Singapore, which means that there is an interconnected grid. So the more of that, the better. I think that's the kind of thing that you're going to see.
Bagi membolehkan masyarakat memberikan pandangan berhubung cara tadbir urus negara yang baik.
Yang lebih penting ialah bersemangat untuk membangunkan negara kita.
Adalah untuk meningkatkan kualiti guru dari segi kelayakan akademik dan perkhidmatan pendidikan negara.
Ia juga tidak lari daripada hasrat kami di peringkat KPM.
Akan diputuskan dalam masa terdekat.
Laksanakan secara bersasar berdasarkan jumlah penggunaan elektrik mengikut kediaman.
Ikuti perkembangan terkini. Buletin Awani 12.30 hari.
Sign up for Astro ID now. Did you know you can get rewards with Astro ID? You get Astro Go too. Did we mention all the apps you can enjoy on the Astro box? Don't worry, billing is made easy with Astro ID. Show them how it's done, Lisa.
Want Astro ID? Just follow these steps. First, go to channel 200, scan the QR code, and you're all set. Activate now and enjoy the best of the all-new Astro.
Big Stage 2023, loading now.
Love is a big stage, we've got a power. Hingga kini bercahaya.
Dominasi generasi Baharu.
This stage is my life.
Powerhouse dengan gaya tersendiri.
Love is a big stage, we've got a power.
Lebih berkuasa dengan semangat dan sokongan peminat.
Big stage, kita berkuasa. Sinari satu angkasa. This stage is my life.
Big Stage, siaran langsung Ahad 9 malam di Astro Ria dan Astro Go.
Saksikan program khas sempena kempen Inilah Masanya Cuti-Cuti Malaysia.
Pantai sepanjang 2 km tempat view sunset paling cantik di Asia.
Saya memang nak bawa anda semua menikmati seafood segar.
Kita ada udang yang fresh dan besar.
Aesthetics is everything, dari architecture hingga ke hidangan makanan.
Setiap Sabtu, 8.30 malam hanya di saluran 501 dan semua platform digital Awani.
Brian, you mentioned about the challenges earlier. So maybe briefly you can share what are those challenges that can stop the effort towards bringing the renewable energy and also towards the sustainability, and in what ways can we promote this adoption especially in Malaysia and maybe perhaps the Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I mean, there's, I'm an observer and a guest in Malaysia, but just let me make an observation that many people have said. One of the challenges that Malaysia has is you have these subsidies that make your gasoline almost the cheapest in the world and your electricity very cheap. What does that mean? It means if my electricity is really cheap, I don't think about it, I'm not motivated to conserve it, I'm not motivated to develop any kind of renewable energy because my electricity is cheap. Why think about it? So I think it's probably important for Malaysia to change that paradigm and to, at least have targeted subsidies, right? So if you're lower income and you need help with your energy bills, that's fine. But the whole of Malaysia, including the upper income people, maybe shouldn't have those high subsidies. So that's something for Malaysia to deal with. But there's other challenges, and I'm not pretending the United States has solved all our problems. In the United States, we have a lot of trillions of dollars worth of energy projects that are waiting to go online. Like somebody wants to build a big solar farm in Illinois, for example, or in Texas, and they can't get permission to connect it to the grid because there's environmental rules and there's, people don't want wires going across their land. So there's hindrances that keep this from being automatic. But in the United States, there's a lot of work on eliminating those. Okay, how do we make it so that if you do have a big solar farm in Illinois and you want to supply power to the surrounding states, let's have some legal mechanisms so you can do that. So I think every country is going to have to try to figure that out on their own. But you have to start by saying, I think it's important that the government set clear goals and incentives. In the United States, there's 3 top-level goals that I think that industry is aware of. One of them is reducing our emissions by 50%, greenhouse gas emissions, 50% by 2030 compared to 2005 as the reference year, right? That's one. And then the second one is to have carbon-free electricity by 2035. That would mean like no coal, no gas. That's a very ambitious target. I'm not really sure the United States is going to reach that, but we aspire to it, and a lot of people are working on it. And the third one, the most important one, is net zero by 2050. That means, the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are net zero. In other words, the sequestration that comes from forests and all that is as much as the greenhouse gas emissions. It's important to have those high-level goals, and then businesses can aim for those, and individuals have to be active as well.
I want to talk about ESG because in Malaysia it's increasingly accepted, especially among the corporate sector, right? In terms of ESG framework and all that. But because you touched a little bit about the R&D just now, if you can learn from US, for instance, how do we get the R&D into execution? Because that's one of the main problems in Malaysia, because sometimes we have a lot of R&D, but getting into execution and commercialization is the problem here in Malaysia. How do we do this, and what best practices can we learn from not just US, maybe other countries, based on your experience as well?
The one the country I'm most familiar with, no surprise, is the United States. The answer there has been the main answer in the United States has been this Inflation Reduction Act that creates these tax incentives, tax breaks for anybody that puts in place some kind of solar, wind, battery technology. The significance of that is, like, let's say I've developed a battery energy, I'm going to build a big battery storage plant.
Yeah.
But the economics of it are such that I'm not sure I'm going to really make a profit on it. Then you come in with this big tax break, and suddenly it's 20% cheaper, 25% cheaper. That pushes it over the edge. So I think that's the same case with, you might have people that are doing research and development. They have a technology, they have something that they want to try, but they need some kind of incentive. So I think government role is to give them some kind of incentive to push it out there. I think that, you mentioned ESG is important in another way, including for Malaysia. What I've read is that a lot of companies, when they look around the world at where they're going to invest, including, maybe considering Malaysia or other parts of ASEAN, some of these companies explicitly say that they're looking at the energy mix of a country. So you have a big company like, say, Google or one of these other companies, they might say, well, we're going to make a decision on where we invest based on the renewable energy mix. And if a country has a good renewable energy mix, that'll be an incentive for investment. So that's another reason for Malaysia to continue down this journey of putting in more renewable energy.
But do you think this region is heading towards that, the energy mix,
in order
to attract more investment?
I think the world has a long way to go. Malaysia has a long way to go. Just as a layman, right? When I was flying back from Langkawi recently, flew into Subang. There's a lot of new construction around there, right? I saw all these new developments. I didn't see any solar panels on the roof, right? Why? Just as a layman, I would just ask, if you're putting in a new construction project in Malaysia, apartments or condos or something like that, why not make solar just a basic part of it? That would just be a question I would ask. Now, I'm very encouraged that the government of Malaysia, I think on May 9th, the Minister of Economy, Rafizi, mentioned that there's going to be a government program, well-funded, to put solar on all government-owned buildings in Malaysia, which includes schools, right? I think there's 300,000 schools. So if all of those had solar panels on them, and if you connect that to the grid, that would be the beginning of a transformation. They say that one of the main factors for somebody putting solar, like individuals can put solar on the rooftop. They say one of the main factors for doing that is if your neighbors have done it, right? You say, oh, my neighbor did it down the street, maybe I'll do it, right? So it becomes infectious in a good way.
All right.
I want to ask about the financing side, based on your point of view as well, because in Malaysia this is one of the challenge as well, because the financing side is quite traditional in that sense, in financing green initiatives, for instance, for corporate, for instance, right?
Yeah.
If they want to adopt solar energy, for instance, it's going to be a very hassle in Malaysia in that sense, right? But how do you see, based on what you've done in the US and also other countries, how can we further enhance and open up a little bit their financing part in terms of supporting more green action, especially for Malaysia and this region particularly?
That's critical because all of these projects, no matter how well-intentioned you are, if you're going to set up a solar farm or a battery storage farm, you have to make a profit, right? Otherwise, the whole thing will fail. So financing is key. I've noticed that when I talk to bankers in Malaysia, international bankers and also Malaysian bankers, if you're just talking to them casually, they say they have a portfolio, they have money set aside for renewable energy projects. They don't have enough good projects coming in. So I think it's more on the side of the renewable energy projects themselves to make better proposals so that the banks will finance them, because the banks are saying that they have the funds available. So I think that's changed for the better. I mean, a lot of pension funds, these multi-billion-dollar funds that hold the money for many individuals, they're basically making rules that say, if you're going to invest in energy, it has to be renewable energy. So I think the financing is headed in the right direction.
All right, last one. Maybe Brian, what can you share? What can you say to the world about during World Environment Day? What can you say to the world towards the sustainable world in the future?
I've talked about government policy and businesses, which are crucial, but I think even more important is individuals.
Yes.
Right. So I'm an individual. When I go back to Virginia after I finished, this work in Malaysia, I'll put solar on my roof. Right. That's something an individual can do. But individuals, it doesn't have to just be that. Malaysia and the U.S. are both democratic societies. Individuals can talk to their political leaders. They can say, what's the plan for the energy supply for Kuala Lumpur going forward? Yeah. Is it going to be more coal or is it going to be renewable energy? Political leaders listen to people, right? So so many people are asking me about renewable energy. Maybe I better, put in more renewable energy. So I think it's governments, individuals, and businesses all have to work together. I think the main challenge is to recognize that this is, we talk about climate change, we talk about climate crisis. More and more I'm hearing people talk about climate emergency. Once something becomes an emergency, you can't look away from it, right? If your house was on fire, you wouldn't say, well, I've done enough on the fire today, right? You would put all your energy into putting out that fire. It's, in a way, I think that's the way we need to look at this. I mean, the world is potentially on fire from the climate crisis. So every individual, it doesn't matter what your field is. Maybe you're in a completely different field. Maybe you're a teacher, but you have to, I think every individual has to, make this their own problem. President Biden said, every individual needs to dare to get involved in this and do more. So I think that would be the main thing. Like if somebody, watching this program, oh, I really haven't thought about it. Well, think about it. Find out more about it. Be active on it. I think that would be the challenge.
All right.
Excellent.
Mr. Brian, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's a pleasure having you with us on Niaga Awani.
Thank you for taking time to speak with us this morning. And which sums up today's session. And once again, happy World Environment Day 2023.